So downloadable content doesn't have the best reputation. It has for the most part been met with a lot of skepticism since the term DLC was used alongside a price tag. Back before mainstream online marketplaces and Steam sales were a thing, games either had expansion packs or no extra content whatsoever, with a few exceptions of course, but as soon as companies were able to start updating a game across all platforms after its release, it wasn't long before they started making money on that way of thinking. This, for better or worse, has extended the lifespan of many games and provided us with more hours of entertainment, but it's also done its fair share of damage in the industry. Hello everyone, I am RedBeakRaven and welcome to a discussion, probably more of a rant video on DLC and expansions I suppose. Yes, in this video I am going to talk about DLC and expansions in general because it's a nut I want to have a crack at. We'll look at the good, the bad and the downright ugly, which unfortunately there is plenty of. Don't worry, I'll try not to make this entirely bad and depressing, there's enough of that on YouTube already, so let's get into it. Now let's start with a little history lesson, shall we? Don't worry if you're not interested, I've got you covered. Timestamp in the description below if you want to skip right to the DLC discussion / rant. Okay, downloadable content is far from new. It has been around since... well, I suppose technically it's been there since GameLine was a thing, which if you don't know was a distribution service for the Atari 2600. The service allowed people to download games over a telephone line. With the rise of internet connection speeds and using the internet for digital distribution of various media, DLC back in the 90s, early noughties was mainly in the form of mods and maps. They are of course a type of downloadable content, but when it came to actual premium extra content, those were in the form of expansion packs, not DLC. In a world where the internet didn't dominate our lives, gamers out there had to visit their local game or computer shops to obtain extra content for the titles they played, mainly PC. The effort it took to get an add-on out and into a consumer's hands back then meant that whatever extra content was being sold had to be worth a purchase. It couldn't just be a few new maps, outfits or even missions, it had to be the whole shebang. New locations, missions, characters, outfits, weapons, vehicles, campaigns, whatever was relevant to the game in question, all mixed together. Warcraft, Diablo, Half-Life, Doom, all examples of how things used to be, how essentially DLC used to be, even though it wasn't DLC. I don't think DLC was even a term up until the middle of the last decade. Expansion packs were all the rage and actually remained that way well into the noughties. For the most part, they were found only on retail discs, but there were of course exceptions. The 1993 Doom is a perfect example. Its popularity led to the development of its expansion packs, an updated version called the Ultimate Doom, released in 1995. A disc version was available, though for those that owned the first one, they were given a free patch to upgrade their copies of Doom to the Ultimate Doom. So I suppose in that instance, you technically had DLC. There weren't many digital distribution services in the 90s and early noughties. We're talking about a time when Ask Jeeves and Neopets were still a thing. The latter apparently is. I was quite young at the time, but looking back now, I remember when IMDb looked like a cheap virus-ridden torrent site, and I think my local takeaways site looks bad. Oh, not even close to this. So yes, the internet digital distribution was in its alpha and beta days, and it seems that most, if not all, DLC at the time was free. Not that there was much of it. Developers, publishers would offer free patches and any free DLC if they had any via their own websites. Remember having to manually download patches from the websites? Oh, that is something I don't miss. Morrowind, for example, brought about a new era for modding, and the game itself, on top of its 2 expansions, had free DLC available on its official website, though these were called plugins, things such as entertainers, bitter coast sounds and adamantium armor, the kind of stuff we'd now expect to see as pre-order bonuses. The expansion packs would continue for more years yet, up until Steam came out in 2003 and rose to prominence following the release of Half-Life 2, and of course when the 7th generation of consoles came about around 2006. We also can't forget that internet connection speeds were still a bit naff in the years leading up to this time, but there's a reason why this century will probably be known as the techno-revolutionary one. I don't even know if that's a real term. In the span of a few years, technology just progressed at an almost alarming rate. We suddenly went from expansion packs to DLC, from 8 megabyte memory cards to hundreds of gigabyte hard drives. Let's address terminology before I continue, and this is completely up to you, but from my perspective and for the purposes of this video, expansion packs, expansions and DLC are different things. I consider expansion packs to be on-disc expansions and expansions themselves themselves are big pieces of extra content, or standalone additions to a game like Wolfenstein The Old Blood. DLC is the stuff you get for less than £15, $20, roughly. It's still to this day a debate amongst gamers what's actually what in regards to this. Technically, all of it is DLC because that means downloadable content, and a lot of us, tend to download mostly everything these days. I've noticed some developers take to calling their extra content add-ons, which is a good idea in all honesty, as it does eliminate that DLC and expansion divide, I suppose it is. Regardless, there are unofficial meanings, and expansion packs used to be the main thing. DLC was rarely given a price tag, and most companies just focused on expansion packs or the actual game. Example, Medal of Honor Allied Assault, 2 expansion packs and nothing else. No skins, weapons, multiplayer maps or mission packs. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, it used to be as simple as that. Granted, it is, an old game and multiplayer wasn't as big back then, but still. Now as for consoles, the Dreamcast was the first one to have online support as a standard. There was apparently some DLC, but not a great deal of it. The PlayStation 2 supported online play, but that was just about it. The original Xbox, however, that did have DLC support, though most of it was free apparently. It wouldn't be until the 7th generation that DLC for consoles became a big thing, and for some, that's where it all started to go downhill. It wasn't until around 2006 or 7 we saw a premium streamlined DLC service come to light. But expansion packs were still going, but it wouldn't be long till DLC rapidly became the bigger focus, and the traditional expansion was essentially replaced. Now this is around the time we started to use the term DLC. Downloadable content was a relatively new thing, at least what we came to class DLC as was new, especially new for consoles. Both the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3 had similar services to accommodate DLC, downloadable games and downloadable expansion packs. This, along with the rise of Steam back in 2003 or 4 and high-speed internet, paved the way for the DLC trend we saw and still see more now than ever. The introduction of such a practice offered a lot of possibilities for the industry. It allowed the lifespan of games to increase and keep us invested in the worlds we love. It allowed developers to bring new ideas to an existing project and add to the overall experience, therefore making already good games even better, though it doesn't go down very well when a bad or mediocre title needs its DLC to be improved. DLC opened up many doors, including more funding for future game development, fans potentially having a say in a game's future with DLC being a request from gamers, and it also tides us over for a longer period of time until the next title in a series is released, as long as the series installments are not released often enough for us to not need a game's lifespan extending. Of course, we also can't forget that digital distribution, the thing that makes DLC, or is DLC I suppose, coming to consoles allowed a lot more gamers to experience what PC gamers did for years before. More content for the games they love. Some titles did release on console with their DLC being sold on discs for various platforms, but not very often. Most of the time companies didn't make DLC for their games, and if they did, console gamers, your original Xbox and PS2 people, got that extra content through Game of the Year or Complete Editions, and there wasn't many of those neither. So DLC had its pros, or rather premium DLC did, but since it came to light in the way we now know it, it's had a rocky history. From the get-go, DLC hasn't been something to think wholly positively of, thanks to many of the things that have come from it. While there's been some great extra content out there, both free and premium, that we may not have otherwise had if DLC wasn't a thing, there's also been a hell of a lot of crap. Overpriced content, absurd amounts of additions, pre-order bonuses left, right and centre, day one DLC being shoved down your throat when you buy a game, season passes not offering all the DLC, online passes, remember those? Difficulty settings as DLC, game endings as DLC, on-disc DLC, and probably a vast amount of it out there not being worth the money originally asked for it, or some of it is just not worth paying for at all. All that is enough to see why this business model that could have been overall good for both the consumer and business just isn't. Over the years, DLC has played in favour of the anti-consumer side, with companies often offering content that really isn't the best value for money and or hurting player experiences in the process. Companies have and do charge whatever they like for whatever they want, and unfortunately it starts for a lot of people with Bethesda. After all, many consider Bethesda of all developers to have created the actual thing we call premium DLC with the extra content they made for the Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion. Throughout 2006, Bethesda released 7 add-ons for the game, and unlike Morrowind, these add-ons were not free. Well, that depends on how you look at it. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe PC gamers couldn't buy the little bits of content separately. Now let's talk about that horse armour, shall we? What would a discussion on DLC be without mentioning the oh-so-famous, or rather infamous, horse armor. In case you don't know, one of Bethesda's DLC for Oblivion was 2 sets of shiny metal armor for a 4-legged beast. It's long been considered by many that Bethesda defined bad downloadable content with the horse armor pack, which was and apparently still is priced at $2.50 or £1.69. So with Bethesda potentially setting the scene for premium downloadable content, we started to see it become more prevalent. Although, bear in mind, in the early days companies were getting a feel for what was acceptable to sell as DLC, so you could have expected a bunch of rubbish, which there was, but here we are 10 to 11 years later and DLC is about as tainted as the London air during the Great Smog of 1952. At first it trickled in with map packs for Call of Duty games, small extra missions for games such as The Force Unleashed and Mercenaries 2, and then it all exploded from there. Resistance 2 got a bunch of multiplayer skins, Assassin's Creed games kept pumping out smallish and fairly boring DLC with every game since the second, Borderlands had 4 pieces of pretty good DLC and then its sequel, while also having good DLC, also got a ridiculous and quite honestly useless amount of it. Saints Row 2 and then 3 got a bunch of it and some of it was in the form of cheat codes. Yes, you paid for cheats. And to top everything off, because sex literally sells and EA just scum of the earth, the Saboteur had you pay to see those virtual nipples on the lovely ladies of a burlesque club. I'm not kidding, there was a piece of DLC that essentially removed the nipple pasties on the women in game. So yes, DLC as we know it was cropping up all over the place and in many forms from around 2007 onwards. So right off the heels of the traditional expansion going away, there was both good and bad DLC and DLC practices. And unfortunately, the bad side takes the cake, which is why it shouldn't be surprising whatsoever that many people hate it overall. Companies have run wild with the whole thing, and despite large outcries against various DLC practices over the years, companies have gotten away with probably everything regarding downloadable content. Now unfortunately, there's a lot more rubbish DLC and its practices that I could go into. I mean, season passes, lazy add-ons like the Courier Stash for Fallout New Vegas, which were pre-order bonuses to begin with, and don't even get me started on Deus Ex's Augment Your Pre-Order program. Anyways, pre-order, Day 1 DLC stuff and season passes, discussions for another day, which I will do eventually, but moving on. Now DLC has got its pros and cons. I've already pointed out some of the pros, and I'm not looking to start a discussion on how we should go back to expansion packs, expansion only content, and get rid of DLC as we know it, although that wouldn't really be a bad thing. For us at least anyways. No, I'm just looking at how it is now and thinking how it could be better. So the cons of DLC. Well, you should be able to figure that out yourselves based on your own experiences and what I've already said, but let's go over some. So some games simply have unnecessary DLC that likely take time away from working on the actual game in development or a future one. That has to have an impact on the final product. It has to. We've seen it happen more than a few times. Games releasing in an incomplete stage, yet DLC for it manages to get out before the game's even finished or fixed. So basically, DLC could probably takes away from the development of the main game itself. Now there are reasons such as console certification on why DLC needs to be worked on before a game is out, but for some, not everyone. Then there's the simple issue of money. DLC causes certain companies and individuals' eyes to roll with money signs. They see DLC as a cash grab, plain and simple, and they know that consumers will buy into it. Although at the end of the day, they are businesses, they need to make money, but that doesn't mean you need to mistreat your customers or provide content of a lesser quality for an increase in quantity. The high profits being made using these DLC practices is the very thing that is keeping them alive. You could use the argument that it's all optional and we don't have to buy into it, which is entirely true, but let's be honest here, it's a bit of a disrespect to fans when companies go out of their way to carry out some of these less favourable practices. Con here is that DLC can be easily misused or used in a very anti-consumer way. Another con for DLC is that it encourages things such as cut content for DLC, or perhaps even content planned for the main game, but implemented later as DLC because they wanted the game out ASAP. As much as developers will insist this doesn't happen or didn't happen in the past, I honestly cannot believe it has never happened. And that says a fair amount about DLC, certain developers, publishers, and the industry in general. The fact that we aren't able to trust in the idea that some DLC isn't cut content is not good at all. Now I've already mentioned the pros, but I'll throw some out there briefly here. DLC provides developers with more funding for their future titles, therefore potentially making them better. Again, it extends the lifespan of the games we love. DLC has provided some great experiences that in some cases are better than the game itself. It also gives reason for devs to continuously work on multiplayer experiences and provide fresh content for when people eventually get tired of it. Despite how much I hate GTA Online shark cards and Rockstar's obvious incentivizing people to buy them with new objects costing a lot of money and the multiplayer missions and AI kind of being rigged against you, the DLC they made for it is pretty good. It's safe to say that the rise of digital distribution has just as many cons as it does pros. It's a very dynamic and quite honestly confusing market that half the time gives out a questionable appearance. While purchasing a game and its additional content from your own home, launching it from your system without needing a disc and potentially getting it at a significant discount is great, the concept has its glaring flaws and is and has been easily abused both by individuals and million-dollar companies. There's an interesting thing that somebody wrote, I can't remember who or where I saw it, that pretty much sums up DLC practices, and it was something along the lines of nobody likes change, nobody likes paying for something that was maybe once free. Nobody agrees with rich folk getting richer off the backs of the little people, but eventually everyone just gets used to it and carries on. In the case of DLC, we get used to a questionable practice only for another method of attempting to milk consumers dry to appear after. That I feel is true. It feels like every year somebody tries to go all King John and take and take and take. DLC or no DLC. Just look at Shadow of War, Silver, Gold, whatever editions DLC and its probable microtransactions. Last year we had the rubbish concerning Modern Warfare Remastered where it wasn't sold separately, and Activision decided to drag the term DLC through the mud with its decision to charge, and charge extra I might add, for Call of Duty 4 Remastered's Variety Map Pack. Now we're not entitled to free content, but it's 10 years old. 2015 was Deus Ex's Augment Your Pre-Order program. 2014 saw AAA titles get microtransactions for the first time, and 2013, do I even want to remember Microsoft destroying their own product with everything about the Xbox One. The online-only thing, the Kinect as a requirement, attempting to kill the second-hand market for Xbox games. Oh dear, that was an interesting year. That was a thick line to cross. Anyways, the list could go on right up until Horse Armor around 2006 or 7. So with all that in mind, DLC in my eyes isn't a bad thing. What's bad is how it is used by certain companies, and I think I've said that already, but moving on. So what needs to change? What direction would I want DLC to go in the future? For DLC itself, what's my preference? Well, that's an interesting question, isn't it? And not one with a simple answer. I honestly don't think I can come up with a definitive answer because of how used to everything that is DLC now I am. Plus, I get the sensation that in the future there will be something else. There always is. Now the first thing I'd like to happen is companies stop selling crappy pieces of DLC many of us aren't interested in and don't add anything to the overall experience. That's what extra content should be in my opinion. Content that adds to what's already there. Outfits, weapons, cars, customization options, overall don't add anything to even the games I love and would like all the DLC for. As much as I may have used certain outfits that you can buy or get with a pre-order such as Shadow of Mordor's Dark Ranger skin, I just don't care about whether or not they exist. If they were in the game, great, but as DLC I've got no interest whatsoever. Stick those in with other bigger add-ons. Watch Dogs 2's DLC is a prime example of what I don't want to see in the future. You've got very short story DLCs and one of them is priced almost as much as a 12-hour expansion. Then you've got all these ridiculously priced aesthetic pieces of DLC. They may as well have stuck microtransactions in the game. I'm not entitled, I'm not complaining these aren't free, but all the DLC in total costs more than £200. That is ridiculous. Same for Borderlands 2, only that has very good DLC such as Tiny Tina's Assault on Dragon Keep and Mr. Torg's Campaign of Carnage, but then it has all this. Now granted the cosmetic stuff is significantly cheaper compared to Watch Dogs 2, but selling skins for a game you don't even see your character in is... come on. Plus, the abundance of little DLC is again annoying. I suppose essentially what I don't want to see in the future is games with lists of DLC and DLC that altogether cost twice as much as the actual game. In the instance of Borderlands 2, I would much prefer it to have gone down like the first game's DLC. Just 4 pieces of DLC that add some interesting content on top of what's already there. If there's going to be a DLC list as big as a celebrity's list of demands, then you could go down the route of The Witcher 3 and use that abundance of extra content where where some of it doesn't add anything solid to the experience, to improve your reputation with gamers. While it may sound a bit entitled to say a large amount of free DLC is okay but not premium DLC, it's more of the fact that, I mean, look at what's free. New Game Plus, you don't sell that. Now when it comes to actual proper extra content, what would I like to see happen in that regard? Well, as you may have guessed, expansion size content for some games, medium large size DLC for others, and leave it at that. Your titles such as Bethesda games, let's go with Fallout 4 in this instance, which offers you 2 expansions and a fairly medium sized DLC. Only problem with Fallout 4 is its workshop stuff. Honestly, I think it would have been better had the 3 been merged together in one big workshop DLC package. Probably not the best choice business wise, but it would have gone down a lot better that way with fans. But as a fan of the settlement building mode, even I had issues with those DLCs. Some of the content in them was questionable at best. Speaking of Bethesda, Dishonored standalone expansion, Death of the Outsider. I'd love to see more of that for games. Have expansions that allow us to play as other interesting characters, and standalone expansions. Your Half-Life Blue Shift, your Wolfenstein The Old Blood, or apparently Uncharted Lost Legacy is an expansion. Those are great gap fillers and opportunities to tell another relative story in the same world. So for your RPGs and open world games, have expansions that come with new areas to explore. Or for games such as GTA, 6+ hours worth of story content. If Rockstar shoved all of the online DLC they've made into the single player or an offline free player mode where I could create my own character and made that as premium DLC, I'd buy that. I was going to say Mafia 3 has the right idea with the exception of the family kickback pack, but I have heard the DLCs are very short and may be a tad too expensive because of that. But there you have the argument of would you rather have something that is greatly entertaining but very short for a high price, or something not so good for a lower price. Personal preference, I suppose. For your games like Bioshock or Prey, Doom, you know, your first person shooters, have DLC like Minerva's Den instead of time trials or survival wave modes. I was going to go into games that don't need DLC, but I've just realised that shouldn't be the case either way. If a game needs DLC, that's a problem. Add-ons are supposed to add to a game, not fix it. I suppose really the direction I would want DLC to go in is for companies to gravitate towards expansions and medium to big DLC. No more little pieces of content that add nothing or very little to the experience. I know some people might enjoy those, but would they be missed is my question. Now the thing about making bigger, better quality DLC is that it takes time, and that could harm sales or player interest. It could also have an impact on the length of time we'd have to wait for a sequel, as these bigger pieces of content would take longer to make. But then again, and I'm quoting here, if something's worth doing, it's worth doing well. If DLC makes as much money as is stated, why not go the extra mile and potentially rope more people in with great content? Word of mouth is a powerful thing, and if you've got a decent bit of DLC worth talking about in a good light, then that's more than likely to be successful than something like Dishonored's Dunwall Trials. Why not merge DLCs together? Well, actually, there's an answer to that. Problem is, quantity seems to always be more successful than quality, and unfortunately, business calls for more money than it does time and effort. Plus, developers themselves say that it's important to get DLC out as quick as possible for some games, as they become as stale as a week-old muffin within weeks or months of release, and the player base isn't there anymore and can't be bothered to come back. However, what could work in that case is making something that's worth the wait, something worth going back to a game for. Doom 2016 has no single-player DLC, and its multiplayer is not as successful as its campaign, and people want DLC for single-player. It's been over a year, and if they announced single-player DLC for it releasing at the end of this year, I'm sure plenty of people would want to get their hands on it. At the end of it all, DLC practices need to change. If that means businesses losing money because of it and we gamers having to wait longer, well, that's maybe a necessary sacrifice. However, that itself could be problematic for some companies due to the ever-rising cost of game development. Your medium-sized teams that may need more than the game itself to make money to keep their heads above water. At the end of the day though, I need to stop saying that, there's one important thing people like me can only do. Don't buy into it. For those who also don't agree with DLC as it is, you don't have to buy it. For all the complaining we might do about something such as DLC, while it's not as simple as not buying it to solve the issue we may have with it, that is still the best way we can deal with it. If there are plenty of people, and seems to be, that want the content that's offered all the time now, then I suppose, fair enough. It's your money and I just won't won't spend mine on things that have no value to me. Unfortunately, there's more than just DLC that needs to change in this industry, but let's not go there. Let's end this here, shall we, on a bit of a light note. Let me know in the comments below what are your thoughts on DLC and expansions. Anything you agree or disagree with? Have any good DLC suggestions? Let me know what you're thinking. I'll be interested in what you have to say. So hit the like button if you like this video. You can also follow me on Twitter or like me on Facebook. Links to those you will find at the bottom of the description. Anyways, thank you so much for watching. That's all from me. So until next time, I'll see you soon.